This is topic 7.3, Mitigation and Adaptation of Climate Change. In the last two topics, we've been talking about climate change, what it is and what the impacts are. Now, what can we do about it? Before we go ahead and talk about things we can do about it, let's talk about the two strategies, mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation means the removal and reduction of greenhouse gases. Adaptation means living with the consequences of climate change. Now that we've defined our terms, let's see what the possibilities are. So, mitigation, how can we go ahead and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air? And again, there's ecocentric, anthropocentric, and technocentric methods. So, an ecocentric might be only eat locally produced foods. Foods that are pretty much showing up in our grocery stores come from all over the world, has a huge carbon footprint. That's a real problem for climate change. Anthropocentric, we could go ahead and do things like put a carbon tax on there. Technocentric, we could do something like scrubbers on factories, come up with ways to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's in there. Another way that's been talked about has been seeding the ocean and increasing the production of plankton to remove carbon dioxide from the air. In general, we call this process decarbonization. That means removing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And again, I've outlined ecocentric, conservation would be a good way, methods to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. That could be anthropocentric, if you had a carbon tax, or shifting our fuels, that would be a technocentric method. Don't forget, we're talking about carbon dioxide in the air. Now, there's been a number of anthropocentric methods, and that is legislation or protocols, treaties, international and local. The Kyoto Protocol was one of them, 1992. You had 192 countries sign on there. Now, the United States has not ratified this treaty in the Senate, but currently the Biden administration is following the protocol. So we'll see how that works out. There's many reasons why we didn't do it. So the pros and cons of this is, well, it's an international treaty. That's a good thing. But how do you enforce it? And one could say that it affects some countries other than others. So if I was Costa Rica, for example, which doesn't have a lot of industry, I'd say, sure, we'll sign the treaty. What the heck, doesn't affect us. But if I was a major country like China or India, if I really followed it, it would have huge effects to my economy. I want to talk about a case study where countries have gotten together to try and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. This one is called Desert Tech. It was originated by Germany. Comes from Europe, though. And the idea was basically that they were going to build a lot of wind and solar issues down here in the Maghreb, the northern part of Africa, where there's a lot of wind. I think it's called the Sirocco winds that come out of the Sahara, and very sunny. And then they were going to build transmission lines to bring that power up here to Europe. Clever idea. Unfortunately, it was discontinued. Not really sure what the reasons were, whether they ran out of money or just motivation. The major technique I want to talk about, though, is for decarbonization is CSS, or what we like to call sequestration. So I'd like you to know that definition there. Sequestration is the capture and storage of carbon dioxide from the air. That's very important, from the air. And I mentioned to you one of the ways that's being talked about is to seed the ocean with minerals like iron. This causes the increase of growth of phytoplankton, which then reduces carbon by taking it from the air, doing photosynthesis, producing oxygen and so forth. Essentially, you're creating an algae bloom in the middle of the ocean. Very natural, cyclical way to remove carbon dioxide. Are there ramifications for doing this on a massive level? Probably. Now let's talk not about mitigation, but adaptation. So how do we learn to live with it? So there's a lot of people who have been saying that it's really too late for us to seriously stop climate change. We've lost the opportunity, and so we need to find ways to live with it. Well, one way would be move cities. Don't have cities and a lot of infrastructure down near the ocean. Don't have it on the coastline. Move it inland. We could go ahead and do GMOs, genetically modified crops that can withstand higher temperatures. Or we could come up with new vaccines. One wonders where COVID came from. Does it have something to do with climate change? I don't know. But we could have more vaccines against the diseases. In other words, we could find ways to live with it. There are anthropocentric methods, policy changes. One of them that's just very controversial is the carbon tax. This is popular in places like Europe, not popular in the United States. Essentially, the idea is this, that if you are putting carbon dioxide in the air, you are actually causing a problem and incurring a debt that everybody else has to clean up. Think about it like this. Suppose I was a factory upstream and I dumped all my waste into the river and then it went downstream. Well, I'd save myself a lot of money. I wouldn't have to clean it up. But when it comes downstream and hits where I live, then the problem all of a sudden becomes me, and I have to pay to clean it up. Think about carbon in the same way. If I'm a factory and I'm pumping a lot of carbon dioxide into the air, and I say, well, I don't care, it's going to just get blown away. Well, sure, it gets blown away, but it goes to places where it destroys infrastructure and it destroys crops and so forth, and those people have to pay the cost of cleaning it up. So a carbon tax says, well, we're going to look at how much carbon dioxide you're putting in the air, and we're going to estimate and then give you a bill for you to clean it up. And if you are getting your act together, the bill would be smaller and smaller. There's a lot of obstacles to doing this sort of a policy here, right? Political, economical, technological. So it's easy for some countries, again, like Costa Rica, to have a carbon tax. It's very, very difficult for countries like the United States. If you put that sort of a cost on industries, perhaps people will lose their jobs. We're a country which revolves around oil, and so there's inertia. It's hard to do it. And that's probably the reason why the Kyoto Protocol has not been agreed to. There was another agreement, the Paris Agreement in 2015, basically the same idea. Also, we never ratified it, but Biden administration is trying to follow the ideas. And that concludes topic number 7.